Okay, so today I'm going to take you through the building of a B18C4 Honda VTEC 1.8 engine. So what we have here is the bare block itself, and all I've done is get some of the bores honed so that scuffs up the surface and enables the new piston rings to bed in properly. So the idea behind that is you have a proper seat for the piston rings and it gets a good seal. So the next thing I want to take you through is the other main construction parts of the engine. So we have the crank itself, that's been micro polished on all the surfaces. So each one of these surfaces has been polished up. We have the con rods and the pistons. So these are just standard B18C4 con rods and pistons, and I'm just going to replace the bearings. And then we have the cylinder head itself, and I'm going to talk about that more in the main section we're going to do on the cylinder head. So there's a lot of work that's been carried out on that as well, and I'll take you through that. I'm going to spin the engine over. Now this is obviously an engine stand I've bought, so the idea is that you have easy access to the engine itself. So you have the engine supported with these bolts, which are the same thread and size as it goes into the gearbox. So just turn it over. You can see it says B18C4, they're stamped on the block. So you turn it over, and then the idea is that you can stop it from turning any more by shoving this. That's just a drift I got in there, so that just stops it moving anymore. Then I grab my socket. It's a 14mm on a 1/2 inch. So I'm able just to undo each of these bolts. Now these have been to the machine shop, so none of them are tight. So I'm just checking they're all loose. I know that they are actually. So then I can just look to be taking all of these out. And then obviously you can take out these bottom bolts as well. So these are just holding each of the bearings in place for the crank. So this is what's commonly known as the girdle, and that stops all of these flexing. Okay. Now I've loosened those bolts off, what I'm going to do is just wiggle them, get them off. So this is actually just the holder for the bearing. Main thing that's really important to do is just lay things out as you take them off in the same way, and then it won't be confusing trying to actually piece the whole thing back together. So one thing you can do, if it's giving you some jip and coming off, so you can actually just whack it. This is just a rubber hammer, this isn't a metal hammer. There we go, we're out. Just like that. Just like that. Okay, and in fact all of these have arrows in. So this is the gearbox side, and they all have arrows going away from the gearbox. So if you do get yourself messed up, you can get back to it. And we're out. The bearings I have are these, which are the crank bearings, otherwise known as the main bearings, and I've had the crank actually measured as well. So the part number you need for those in the ACL Race series bearings is 5M1959H / and standard. Then I have the bearings which are for the big end of the con rods, so i.e. that end, the large end of the con rod, and those again are checked as being a standard size required, are 4B1925H / standard. Then finally the pistons are actually in pretty good shape, so we can just leave them in the engine, and I've just gone for the NPR piston ring set. So these are a real top quality Japanese made item, and that is part number SWH30373ZZ, and that's an 81mm diameter for these. Finally, shouldn't forget this. These are the thrust bearings that go in the ledges here of the carry the main bearings, and it actually stops the sideways movement of the crank, and enables oil to be set up as a film there, and lubricates that. Okay.
What part number is that?
Oh, good point. That is again ACL bearings, and that's 1T1 957 standard. But these fit all types of these engines. I think they fit the B16 and B18. Okay, so here I have the bare block really, but I've still got these old bearings in. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove them. You'll notice that you have these tabs in there, and common misconception about those tabs is it stops them spinning when the engine's running. That's completely false. The tension that's caused by actually clamping the bearing carriers is enough to stop these spinning. These are just really locating points for the bearings. So the idea is, because it's got that tab on that side, you want to push the opposite tab, and it should just slide out pretty much. There's one of them out. I'll just locate that here, and then you just do the same for the rest. So that's out, that's out, that's out, that's out, and then just stack them up. Okay, so one thing I didn't mention was that you need to take out obviously the old thrust washer. So that's just here. There'll be one on the other side as well. That's what they look like. So that can come out. And then what you're doing is that you'll just clean down each of these surfaces. I've already kind of cleaned them anyway. You can use some engine degreaser or some alcohol, and just make sure each of these surfaces is nice and clean. Then what you need to do is you need to use some engine assembly lube. I think this is a really good one. This is a Torco MPZ engine assembly lube. I'd rate buying some of this. And the idea behind that is when you first start up the engine, you need to make sure there's some initial high quality lubrication in it, and that's really important so that for bearing life and to get everything bedded in nicely. So I really would recommend using this first off. So what you do is you can apply some in each of these surfaces here. So you just put a little bit on here. Okay. Then I'm going to start inputting these new bearing shells into the engine. So what you do is you start off at the side and just slowly feed that in, and again the assembly lube makes this even easier to do, because it's just sliding in nicely like that. Just make sure that is properly seated in there, and then grab your next one, and again just feeding in nicely. Seated, and the next. Okay. Put your finger that way. And the fourth. See that? Just that. Sliding in. Okay, and then the final one for the bottom of the engine at least is the fifth one. You see that, Andy?
Yeah, that's better. Okay.
Okay. One of the really important things to do before you put the crank in to a B18 block is that you need to put these little oil squirters in them into the actual block first. So all they consist of is a threaded screw which has a hole in the bottom of it, which is the oil inlet, and then they have the hole at the top, which is the oil outlet, which goes into this little spraying module, and then the oil comes out here and then sprays into the back of the piston. So the important thing here is that you see there's a locating dowel there. So you just need to actually place it on there, like that, like so. And then be very, very careful to not cross-thread this. Very easily done. It's a very, very fine pitch thread. So just ease this in by hand, and when you've done that, when you realise it's going in nicely, then you just go in there with your 10mm socket, and again, just with finger torque at the moment, just snug that down. So all you do is just make sure that all of them are just snugged down by hand first, and then you can tighten them up, but you don't need much torque. All that it's doing is just snugging down. One thing you want to do before putting the crank in is you want to put these thrust bearings in. Now a good tip is that if you put a little dollop on the back of these, then they'll actually stay butted up to the the block itself, and therefore they won't fall off. So if you just go like that, place them one in there, and again another one here, just a couple of dabs, little dab there. It's not really to lubricate anything because it's obviously away from the crank, but it's just to stop them falling in. So that would be pretty frustrating. So now they're in, I can grab the crank itself. And what you want to do with this is you want to be nice and gentle. It does weigh a fair amount, and you don't want to damage the bearing surfaces, so you just walk it in nice and easy. And that is it. You're in. So this is the crank itself, and when it comes back from the machine shop, they put Vaseline quite often on it, and this is just to stop it rusting. So you really just want to wipe that stuff off. This is one of the bearing carriers. So what I want to do is really show you in detail how you go about removing the bearing. So this is the old bearing here. So I'll put these to one side, the bolts. Then what we can do is we can just press on here, press on the side. Okay, and that just slides up here, so that's the old bearing out. I'll tuck that away. And then I get my engine assembly lube. Just put a bit round here. It's probably quite a lot, but take the new bearing. And then again, you see there's a tag here, there's not a tag that side. So what you want to do is you feed in the non-tag side in. So you just start off here. So you're following constantly the radius of the bearing carrier. And it's in. And you'll know it's in when it's you've got that little tang in there, and it's pushed down both sides, and there's obviously no gap in the carrier itself. I've just put some engine assembly lube on each of the points of the bearing face, and then I'm ready to put in the bearing straps themselves. So what I've done is I've put the new bearings in the same way as I did before. So then I'm able just to place them on. Okay, now as before, the arrow is pointing away from this side of the engine. So this side is the gearbox side, so we're actually pointing the arrow away from. So what I can do is I can just place each of these on and just lightly press them in. So here I'm just going to put the actual girdle in place, so it will just nestle down in there. I'll do the same, this final bearing strap, and then like this. And then I'll just use my mallet to tap down. And you hear the sound changes when you're actually fully seated. Okay. The next thing to do is to make sure that you've snugged down all of these bolts that hold on the bearing caps and the bearing girdle, which is this main bit in the middle. So what I'll do is I'll just snug them all down. So one of the key things you really need to consider when you're building an engine is you need some torque wrenches in order to be able to have the correct torque for individual bolts that you need to do up on your engine. So I have two different types of torque wrench. They both work in the same way, but they work in different ranges. So this one is a smaller one. It goes from 10 Newton meters all the way up to 80 Newton meters. And I have my larger torque wrench over here, which goes from 28 Newton meters all the way up to 210 Newton meters. So the idea behind torquing up my the bolts which hold the bearings, so the bearing caps and my girdle, is that you need to do it in two steps. So the first off you need to do is around 24.4 Newton meters. So what I'll do is I'll show you how to go about setting this torque wrench. So at the start, you're starting off with 0 Newton meters, or at least unwound to, I'm actually at 10 Newton meters here. So you go to the bottom of the range of your gauge. So when I've got a 0 here and I'm at 10 Newton meters, that's what this starts off at. What you need to do is you need to wind it on from there. So if I need to go to 24, I go one turn round back to 0, and that means I'm at 20 Newton meters. And then if I go 4 more, I'm at 24, and 24.4 is going to be part of the way into there, something like this. And then you can lock off using this knurled bit at the bottom. Now it's time to torque up the crank. This has to happen in a specific order, starting off at 24.4 on the 14mm socket. So start off at position 1, and then 2, 3, then 4, then 5, and 6, and 7, and 8, and 9, and 10, and then we go over to the larger torque spec, and there's two different torque specs.
For the middle 6, the 64 Newton meters, and for the outer 4, it's 73 Newton meters.
So first off, 64 Newton meters, which I have here. Start off at 1. Number 2. 3. 4. 5. 6. And then go up to, what was that, Andy?
Outer 4 is 73.
So you go up to 70 plus 3, 73. And we're just going to do number 7. Number 8. Number 9. Lastly 10. everything's all torqued up. Last point is that when you put these torque wrenches away, you want to wind it back down to the minimum. So this one's at 10 Newton meters, so there you go. That's set. Wind the knurl on. And then that just means it will stay in calibration longer. The last thing you want to do is input a torque on the torque wrench and leave it in the box. Next time you come back to it, it won't be actually calibrated correctly. Again, with this one, we were up in the 70s, so I'm going down now. I'm just going to take all of that out of the torque wrench, and it will go down to 0. There, 28, that means it's 0 there, which is 28 Newton meters, and just lock that off.
And also make sure you don't wind it too far.
Don't wind it too far or you'll ruin the torque wrench, that's a very good point.